everybody, and thank you so much for joining us in our second video or our video series, QR Code Best Practices. Today's video, size matters, and we do intend pun there because today we're talking about the size of your QR code. Okay, so the size matters greatly. A, to make sure that it can be scanned, and B, that when it's scanned to make sure that the experience is as quick and efficient for the user as possible. So let's jump right in. So if you haven't watched our first video in the series, generating your QR code, I recommend you go to our YouTube page, youtube.com/KW North Idaho. Check out that first video. This one's going to make a heck of a lot more sense after you're watching the first one. So the URL that we use as an example in all of the video series is our URL that we're talking about is www.kellerwilliamstruthaorfiction.com. So as you can see, it's a long URL. That long URL, dumping it into Coeur, the service that we talked about in the first video that we use to generate our QR codes, produces this QR code. So now, if you haven't done QR codes before, you're looking at this, you're saying, well, I don't know what's wrong with this one. It's a QR code. If you scan it, you'll see it takes you back to the page. Why do we need to do anything more? Okay, so if you do this, that's great. It's better than not doing it, but there's a way to make the experience better for the consumer. We all know that in the mobile generation, we all expect stuff now. The internet, our mobile devices, our iPads, we can have information, anything we can imagine, instantaneously. And so because of that, our consumers are of that mindset. We have to provide that same service to them if we're trying to take their time and get them to our website or a page on our site or a specific call to action. So this QR code works, but you'll see it's very, very complex. And let me show you what I mean. So what we're going to talk about today is how to shrink the QR code, which makes the QR code less complex and makes the experience for the user faster, meaning that when they scan the QR code, it takes them to the site faster than without shrinking it. So this is an example using the same domain. We're pointing to the exact same spot, the same KellerWilliamstruthaorfiction.com site, but you can see the URL or the QR code is much shorter. It's also less complex, and let me show you what I mean by that. So here's a side-by-side comparison. The one on the left is the version, if we just go straight to Coeur, dump in the KellerWilliamstruthaorfiction.com URL, we get the QR code on the left. It works, but we're going to kind of polish that a little bit. The QR code on the right is what we've used through a URL shrinker that we're going to talk about next. But you can see it's a smaller QR code, and there's also less activity in the QR. So the one on the left has a lot more black matrix stuff in it. That means it's more complex. There's more for the scanner to read on the mobile phone. That's going to take a little bit longer. I mean, it may be seconds, but it's still going to take longer for the phone to read and route the person to the site you're trying to get them to than the one on the right. So we're wanting to make the QR code as small and as less complex as possible to make the experience as good as possible. Now, when I say small, I mean it's small in how it's generated. One thing that you'll see a lot of people using QR codes that they don't think about when they use them is they put them too small in print ads. QR codes should be an inch by an inch on anything you're using, or a lot of phones have trouble scanning them. So keep that best practice or that tip in mind, an inch by an inch. If it's smaller than that, half the stuff you see in the newspaper and the magazine ads that people are using without knowing this, they're not even scannable. So they're putting it in there, but the user can't scan them. And if the user does that on one of your ads one time, they're probably not likely to scan another QR code on your page, your ad, your website, whatever it may be, again, because they're not going to waste their time. So to shrink the URL, to get the smaller and less complex QR code that we were talking about, we use a service called goo.gl. Now, if you don't have a Google account, you need to set your Google account up for a lot of reasons because Google does just about everything. But once you have your Google account set up, you'll go to goo.gl, and what goo.gl is a URL shortener. So in order to get that QR code smaller and less complex, before we generate the QR code, we need to shrink our URL. That big long URL that we're using is great, but if we shrink it, we can come up with a better product in the end. So you can see down here, paste your long URL here in the page. We would literally just dump in our www.kellerwilliamstruthaorfiction.com, click on shorten, and this service automatically generates us a compact shortened URL. So it points to the exact same website that we're taking them to, but it makes the URL itself shorter. That's when we take that shortened URL, go into Coeur like we talked about in the first video. We use that shortened URL here to generate the QR code, click generate, and now we've generated a smaller, less complex QR code. That in turn is going to make the experience faster and more user-friendly for our consumer, and that's exactly what we want. Now, one other thing going back here in goo.gl to remind you of too, When you use goo.gl, you have your analytics account. If you don't know what Google Analytics is, that's a separate video. But when you use your Google account to shorten the URL, it automatically dumps that URL into analytics. So now not only are we shortening the URL, we're making the QR code more user-friendly, less complex, but now we can track our traffic use of the QR code. So I can see how many people scanned it, where the traffic is coming from, what browser they're using. I can see a whole lot of information about the usage of that QR code, so now I can hold that advertising accountable. So lots of good information. I really hope you guys take the time to go this extra step and make your QR codes as user-friendly as possible. If you have any questions, feel free, as always, to contact me, Ben Fairfield, at bfairfield@kw.com, or call me on my cell phone, 208-660-7204. Talk to you soon.